Hello, hello. Oh, let's get this light. So, testing, testing. Looks like we're going through. This is the first perspective session. It's where I want to introduce a topic and then have a discussion about it. Now, of course, in these early stages, there's not going to be a lot of people here, so it'll probably just mostly be me talking. That's okay. People can come back in the future, look over past episodes. So I'll just go ahead and get started. I do want to say, though, that I noticed while I can stream to Instagram, the comments don't appear to show up in the stream chat for me. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I'll look into it a bit more. But that just might be yet another window I have to keep up off to the side somewhere. Or easier would be for everyone who wants to participate, come over to one of the other platforms, Facebook or YouTube preferably. They both have vertical orientation, just like Instagram. All right. So this session, this topic, is understanding yourself. I actually had thought of a bunch of different names for it, like decoding your identity, critical self-reflection, even one such as challenging your assumptions. And they all kind of get at the same thing, which is the idea offered in the quote by Adrian Rich: until we understand the assumptions in which we are drenched, we cannot know ourselves. The bottom line is that self-awareness is crucial to understanding one's own identity and behavior. In other words, we're all shaped by a myriad of cultural and societal assumptions. We're born into different societies, and often we don't notice how these societies influence our identity and how we act. And until you can critically examine these assumptions, you can't really truly understand why you think, feel, or act the way you do. So the question is, how do you gain this self-awareness? Well, I don't think there's only one way. There's numerous ways, I'm sure. But I'm going to talk about a few different ways that I've used that have worked for me. One is through self-observation. And is this positioned okay? I need to, sorry, I'm thrown off. I'm going to try to look into the camera, but my text is over here. So I'm just going to have to. So self-observation. What I mean by this is, you can track your reactions. Notice what makes you feel energized and what makes you feel drained. Notice when you feel the most authentic, true to yourself, and when you're not. And when you get emotional, sit with those emotions. Don't brush them off. Don't escape from them. Really sit with them and try to identify what brought them up on a deep level. Often I think people make the mistake of kind of getting only at the surface level of their emotions, when there is often a much, much richer story underneath if you just take a moment to really sit with them. You can also identify patterns. What situations bring out your best and your worst responses? Like, we've all been in situations where, we do something and then we look back a little bit later and we're like, damn, like, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I did something differently. Or, this kind of self-reflection is important. It's like reflecting on your behavior and trying to understand the deeper why. Another way is through, of course, mindfulness. You can monitor your thoughts and through the practice kind of become aware of like what ideas are coming to your mind a lot. And that can kind of give you a sense of like, where your brain is constantly headed. And maybe you can sort of unpack what that might mean. And of course, write all this stuff down. That can be like sort of your logbook. But so that's one way, kind of like observing yourself, observing your patterns. Getting feedback from a friend too can really be helpful. An honest friend though, we all have friends who will ask them like, how was this? How was that? And they're just so nice and they always want to say everything's nice and rosy, but find a friend who's like, gonna tell you the hard truth and can be super direct and super honest with you. Another path towards understanding yourself is to sit down and write down your values. List what matters most to you. This is actually something I've been doing a lot over the past few years because I've been interested in intentional community. And part of finding the intentional community that works for you in the long run involves knowing what you want. So listing your values, like what's important to you. And if you're kind of confused, like what's a value, where do I go with this? You can just Google some stuff up, but ask AI and be like, what are some values that people have? But for example, I remember when I was drafting these values, I had values of, sustainability. I wanted, to live in a place that valued sustainability and regenerated the land and not just kind of like trashed everything. I valued resilience, right? I want like a strong community that can withstand, ups and downs of economics and internal and external conflicts. I wanted a community that valued growth. They're kind of like a community where people are willing to accept who they are and recognize that there's always more to learn, more to grow, and beyond that, kind of be willing to look at their shadows and their traumas, be willing to learn the techniques of effective communication and conflict resolution and things like that. Trying to improve their emotional intelligence. So there's all these different things one could value, and writing those down can kind of give you a sense of like, okay, this is kind of like what constitutes some aspect of my identity. And then when you have that list, I would also then take stock of your actions. This can be hard to do objectively because we're kind of like biased being ourselves. So you might have like a friend do it with you, or your brother or sister, but you can write down all your actions and then ask yourself, do those actually align with your values, right? You value sustainability, but maybe you buy a lot of, single-use plastic. you use a lot of plastic water bottles instead of getting your own like nice refillable bottles, so you're not wasting as much plastic. You say you value health, but you're eating 5 cheeseburgers a day. That might not be in alignment with your values. So there's what you kind of like cognitively value, and then there's your behavior. And getting a sense where they match up and where they don't can tell you a lot about yourself. And also can help you become more aligned with your values. And that's really great. So yeah, just notice the differences there. And like I said, if you have to, you can actually ask a friend to do this with you, and see what they say. Do I live in alignment? When I say that I value, health and wellness, do you think I embody that? And in what ways do I? And what ways do you think I not? And you could learn something from that. Speaking of friends, you might actually look at your friends and the people that you connect with and see if you can identify patterns, because that could tell you more about yourself than you might think. And it could not really say anything at the same time. For every person, it's different. But if you have a lot of friends that play video games, okay, you're probably a gamer person yourself. That's like, are you? Yeah, probably. Or maybe not. You just happen to be that person who has a lot of video gamer friends, but you hate video games. I don't know. I'm not saying it necessarily means anything, and be mindful of what you conclude from all these things. But who you associate with, their particular personalities, can tell you something that might be worth noticing. Another thing that's important to do, I think, is reflect on your past. And I think this is a big one. Human beings are very flawed in a lot of ways, and many of us get extremely traumatized, or subtly traumatized in a bunch of different ways. And maybe not even traumatized, that's kind of like a strong word, traumatized. Maybe just whatever the word is for half of traumatized, or like a micro trauma that affect us. So just look at patterns that you have. I noticed a lot when I was younger, a pattern that I saw it reflected back to me, was people thought I was arrogant, my early 20s. And I could totally see that, how various aspects of how I was raised and the experiences I had made certain things fall into place so that would be the case. For example, one fateful decision I made was to join the debate team in high school. And like, I thought that was great. And, in a lot of ways it was, it taught you to like argue for a point, your position persuasively. I even won first place at a tournament. What was that? MHL. I forget what MHL, Metro Hudson League? I don't know. But proud day of my life. But at the same time, it kind of taught me to be kind of debatey, in conversation with people, instead of really listening to what the person was saying and trying to like get at the heart of what they mean, my brain kind of became wired to like rebut their claim, like check their facts, and like, yeah, it may be good for like, the law, the court of law, or like debate sessions or something, but in normal conversation with people, this kind of like tendency to like be yeah, just like a little bit less empathetic and a little not quite listening to what people have to say, didn't help me, didn't serve me, and it made me seem arrogant to a lot of people. So that was definitely a reality check. Um, and that was probably just like some aspect of it too. There's probably all sorts of different contributing factors, but it can be even the simplest thing. Like, think about something you like to do a lot. Like, oh, I like to drink coffee. Every morning I go to Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts. Why is that? You know, a lot of people are like, oh, I drink coffee because it's delicious, and that's the reason why. I mean, maybe, but how much of the influence of, how much were you influenced by the mere fact that you live in a coffee drinking society? For example, if you had grown up in India, maybe you would have been drinking chai, right? Um, we like to think kind of like naively that everything is a very deliberate decision that we make, and that's that. But in reality, there are influences that we are often not fully aware of. And it can be helpful to take a step back and think about, okay, like I've thought for so long, I have this story that I like coffee for this reason, or that I like hockey because I chose it as a kid between all the sports. But when you really step back and analyze, you might find that there are other influences in there behind your decision making. Your story that you've had for your whole life may not be as accurate as you think. And so this is just, again, more steps to sort of unraveling your identity, the assumptions we have about ourselves, so we can understand ourselves even better. Another thing you can try to find when you're kind of reflecting upon your history is pivotal moments in your life. Moments when you've changed or grown. When did you change or learn something important? These can tell you a lot about your life. For me, there was a lot of little tiny moments of both growth and just big changes in my life that I'm still unraveling today. For example, when I was 6 years old, my parents left me and I was put into foster home. If I try to think about it now, like honestly, I don't remember being that sad about it. Like I can't really remember, like 6 years old, I don't have like the best memory back then. But I bet there were some profound effects on me as a kid. What I remember the most was just like kind of being confused, like shuffling from one place to another. I feel like there was like social workers and adults everywhere. Like at one point I was with my mom, then I was not with my mom, and then I was with these people, and I moved around. And I just kind of felt like I was just this little being shuffled around places for a while. And then I was in foster home for a while. And that definitely had its own impacts on me, many of which I have like realized later, and I can totally see. For example, I'm a gamer. I play video games. And I thought about like, why do I play video games? Well, I think it all came down to my foster family, right? So when I was put into foster home, my foster parents, they had kids of their own, and they also ran a daycare. So there was always kids around, which was cool. It was great. There was like a lot of kids to interact with all the time. But it also meant that I didn't have a lot of individual attention. So one of the strategies they used to like kind of help keep me occupied while they focused on all the kids around was to give me a game. So I remember very early on, I got, the big fat gray Game Boy that came with Tetris. And from there I was hooked. I played so much Tetris, it's unbelievable. And then from there it was more Game Boy games. I got Sega Genesis. I was playing Sonic 2. The Sonic game that had like a cartridge that flipped up and you could put another cartridge in it. That was cool, and like unlock all these weird levels. the world of gaming exploded wide open for me. And even after I was adopted, many years later, and actually my adoptive parents like hid my console, like they didn't want me to play video games. They just gave me a bunch of books, which is great, by the way. Reading is awesome, and I was super into reading for a while too. But I still had the gaming bug in the back of my mind, and whenever I got to a computer, I would usually wind up finding a game or two to play. So this is just, one example of how I can kind of identify how I became a gamer and what where that came from. And then of course there are other influences. It's usually never just one thing. The other part of it for me was that I had some trouble with my adoptive parents, and especially in high school. It was kind of like a bit of a toxic relationship. And for me, gaming was an escape. And it is even to this day, like I see this pattern within me. It's a way for me to not have to face my emotions and just kind of like immerse myself in a world. This was especially true for, fantasy games where I had like a character and I had armor and I could, prove myself in the game, walking around Orgrimmar or Stormwind with your shiny armor, like, wow, like you got this really amazing gear, you must be special, you must be cool. And it was just a way for me to like escape this real life world where I had difficult emotions that I didn't know how to process, and I could be in this other world where I could be appreciated and I wouldn't have to deal with that stuff. So emotional avoidance is definitely a huge part of why I played even more games later on. So these are just examples from my life how I've sort of stepped back and tried to understand why it is that I do the things that I do. And this is, I think, something everyone can do for themselves. And, it may not take one night. You might not just be able to do it super fast, but, just, occasionally sit back and ask yourself these questions. Why do I have these patterns, and where did they come from? And maybe ask your friends or family. Maybe they can point you to stuff that you're not fully aware of. And I think that's super helpful too, because I think I've found out so much more about myself in relationships than I did just like sitting there by myself thinking about myself. Because I don't know, we're biased against ourselves. When you have somebody who's like, especially someone, you know that they love you and they want to help you, and they can give you a more objective point of view. One thing I would also add is you can do this with your parents. I've been dying to do this with my parents. All my parents, actually, right? Because I have had 3 sets of parents. I've had my biological parents, I've had my foster parents, and I've had my adoptive parents. And they've all influenced me in subtle ways. And talking to them about their history and what shaped them can be very revealing. And I've done this a few times with my adoptive parents especially. I mean, they've shared to me kind of like how they were raised. And it gave me like, oh, like, wow, like that's why they did that. Like their parents were that way to them. And so that's probably why they were that way to me. And, just have this conversation with your parents or your brother or your sister or anyone in your family, uncles. And you might be surprised of what you could learn about yourself and just your family even from having these conversations. For any viewers also, feel free to jump in, chat at any time. I'm just going on here because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of activity right now, so that's cool. I'm gonna keep going, but yeah, feel free to jump in. So then there's kind of this other aspect I want to talk about, which is how do you prevent yourself from kind of like being cemented in this like identity and kind of stay like fluid and flexible? I don't think anybody really wants to be this like rigid, unflinching person whose like opinions never shake and they have this fixed story. Human beings aren't fixed. As much as you might think that's the case, we are always changing. There's a famous, well, I don't know about famous, but there's a well-known quote from Heraclitus. I think he was a pre-Socratic or ancient Greek philosopher, and he said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, because it's not the same river and it's not the same man." Which is to say, things are always changing, right? The river, it's carving out the banks and becoming a different shape all the time. Over time, you look at a river over thousands of years, it's not even in the same area. It's like curved off in a different direction. And same with people. You're not the same person who you were when you were 10 or 15 or, as you grow older, you become a different person. You gain more knowledge, more experience. So this idea of a static self, I think, is commonly held, but not really true. We're always evolving people. And so I think there are things you can do to kind of like push the boundaries and experiment and see what works and see what doesn't, and maybe learn new things about yourself in the process. For example, you could try new activities. I remember there was a phase, I've always been really growth oriented. I don't know why or where it came from. Why do I care about growing? I don't know, I'll think about that a bit. But for some reason, I'm always like, it doesn't matter where I am now, but I know I can be wiser, kinder, nicer, better person. And how do you get there? Well, I think one way is to try new activities. They say growth happens at the edges. So try a new hobby, take a class on a subject you know nothing about. Volunteer for a cause you believe in. Join a new social group. In doing these things, they're not all going to stick. Maybe you try a pottery class and you say, that's not for me. That's okay. But you should pay attention to what works and what doesn't. And maybe you'll find a new thing. Like, oh, I'm really into this. My whole life, I have never tried bungee jumping. But now, this is amazing. I want to be a bungee jumping master, right? Like, there are areas of ourselves that we have yet to discover and things we may yet find really enjoyable because we kind of like stay in this little like comfort zone. So don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone every once in a while. You may discover something about yourself. There might be a passion you never knew you would have until you tried, knitting or whatever. The other thing you can do is challenge your assumptions. And I think this is so critical, especially in our very polarized world. You look online, all the, Twitter and social media, and everyone's got these like strong opinions. They're yelling at each other. It's chaos. I kind of just wish that people would take a step back and, first of all, listen to each other. Come on. But also, instead of having these like very rigid opinions and maybe step back and question, like, why do I believe what I believe? Like, what is this based on? I think a lot of people would find that it's not really necessarily based on something like deep rational belief or reasoning. I think this is a common idea that people have, like every belief I have is rational. I've thought about it and I came through these, through all the evidence and I combed through it all and I boom, 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 and I came to this logical conclusion and that's why I believe that thing. Not really. I think a lot of times people feel an emotion about something, and then they try to rationalize that emotion after the fact. There's a theory about this called emotivism. You can Google it. In reality, most of our beliefs are not something that we like kind of, sat down for hours and like rationally came to, but they were just passed on to us by our culture, by our neighbors, by our peers. And if we were able to like unpack a lot of these, we may change those. We may realize those aren't really for me. But I don't think there's a lot of this challenging assumptions. So I think that would be really good if a lot of people did that. And I think lastly, beyond trying new activities, beyond challenging assumptions, is stay curious. Like I said before, identity evolves. We are not rigid beings. So if you think of it less like I'm trying to arrive at some like final rigid identity of me, and think of it more like I am an evolving being, and who I am today is not going to be who I am tomorrow, and it's not going to be who I am in 5 years from now. If you have a more flexible attitude like that, then I think you'll be more forgiving and compassionate towards yourself and towards others. Especially today, I feel like it's quite a very toxic world where, someone makes a mistake and then they get called out on social media and everybody's like, sending them death threats and all these terrible things. Like, Jesus, like, yeah, people make mistakes every once in a while. We're just human beings. That's okay. I think as long as a person can be humble and admit their mistake, that's fine. They're not, we don't need to burn everybody at the stake because of mistakes that they make. And you can be compassionate for them and for yourself when you make a mistake. So yeah, stay curious. Okay, so we're about halfway through here. The last part that I wanted to, the last thing I wanted to talk about here was kind of like a group of assumptions that many Americans hold without realizing it. So yeah, I'm just going to go through this list. I was kind of like, how should I do this? Well, I'm just going to go through this list. I wrote down a bunch and kind of like roughly categorized them. But let's just start with the first group. This is under the category of individual success. And one big one that I see around all the time is this idea that hard work alone determines outcomes. The belief that the American dream, like anyone can prosper through determination. I think that there's some truth to that. Like, it's pretty, there's some room there for, from people who are really poor to get really rich. We have a system that is really nice like that, compared to other countries that are maybe in a bit darker places where the power might be more cemented and it might be harder to climb the ladder. In America, it pretty much like if you have a really great idea and you're a really passionate and hardworking person, you can go far. But the idea that hard work alone determines outcomes, I think, obscures the reality that there are systemic advantages and disadvantages. First of all, the advantages, people who are born with inherited wealth. That's a huge advantage. Especially like wealth plus the ability, the people who, if you know the right people, that's huge. Like wealth plus your circle of like the people around you can dramatically affect your success. If you are the neighbor of a billionaire who can give you a 0% interest loan on your, you know, business idea. That's a huge advantage. Just having wealth, having connections is a reality, and many people don't have those things. So it's a lot harder for people who don't. Access to quality education is another one. Many people do have access to really great education, while others less so. And that can be huge. I mean, schools, I'm not really sure. I haven't been to college in 10 years, but you know, schools used to have some measure of importance, right? If you had Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Stanford on your resume, that was important. That was big. You could walk through any door with that. Maybe not so much today. I don't know where it's at, but definitely having access to top tier schools is huge. And you know, there's legacy admissions. There's just people who have gone to better high schools because they grew up in a nicer area with a better high school than maybe one in like a poorer part or like of the inner city or something. And so there are educational differences that make it much easier or more difficult for some people to get ahead in life. Geographic location makes a big difference in that. It makes a big difference in your social network, who you know. If you grow up around a bunch of people who are, you know, all well connected, or you know, kind of going into the example I can think actually is my high school. I think like a ridiculous amount of my high school, probably like 20% of my class went to an Ivy League school or something. I mean, it was apparently one of the best high schools, public high schools in the nation. But that's so big. Like I know so many people who went to like MIT and Harvard, and just knowing these people, that creates like networks of influence that I had that many people do not have. And so, you know, just these kind of disparities are huge. And of course, there's the racial disparity, right? There are certain races, I don't really like that word because I think it's a kind of this fictitious concept. We're just humans, right? But you can have a certain color of your skin that unfortunately today makes it harder for you than people with other colors of skin. And that's an unfortunate reality that I think a lot of people might not think about or dismiss. So it's just important to keep these things in mind. Hard work alone does not necessarily determine outcomes. There's a lot of advantages and disadvantages. Another one of these big ideas that people have is that anyone can make it with enough effort. It's kind of like a similar idea, but I guess it just ignores these structural barriers that I was talking about before. You know, like race and where you grow up, and you know, generational poverty, discrimination, etc. Related to that is that you know, personal failure equals a character flaw. This idea that when you fail, that's like your own flaw. That's not really true. I think that leads to just more victim blaming and shame and success. People who succeed don't have a superior moral character. Success is often just who you know. It's often pure luck. In fact, I would technically argue that it is 100% luck, in that everything about a person is not really decided by them, really. You don't decide where you're born, who your parents are and how they raise you. You don't decide whether you're going to have a brain that is really good at math calculations. You don't decide whether you have a body that can, you know, dunk a basketball just by like standing on your tippy toes. You don't decide how many fast twitch fibers you have, right, in your legs. Pretty much everything relevant about you is just mere circumstance. It's just chance. Either you were born to be a super genius or not. Either you were born to be this amazing, like genetically predisposed to be like this super athlete, or you're not. Or worse, you were born disabled, right? Either you're born to a wealthy family or you're not. You're born to a wealthy family with bad parents, or you're born to a poor family with amazing parents, right? Like there's so many factors that have a huge influence on the outcome of our lives that aren't really up to us. So it's really, there's so much luck to it. It's just crazy. Even the very idea that, okay, like I realize though that Nathan, that all said, I accept there's so much luck to it, but I'm the one deciding now that I'm going to work hard and prove myself and you know, I'm going to work hard. Sure, but you're not the one who really decided to work. Like, think about someone exactly in your situation who had the same, you know, similar parenting, you know, grew up in a similar region, who doesn't decide to work hard, and they just are lazy and smoke weed all day. Like, you are lucky that you're not them, right? Like, whatever it is, there's some set of events and sequence of events in your life that led you to believe that you should work hard, that wasn't under your control. That's the kind of the key thing to remember. Like even the idea of like, I want to work hard is not something like, did you just conjure that in your mind? You say, I'm going to work hard. Like it just snapped on. Like, how did that idea come to you? We don't choose the ideas that come to us. And as you meditate more, you realize this, right? You can, as you meditate, the idea is to just let things come and, you know, they'll float away. They'll just dissipate. Different thoughts. And you realize you are no more the arbiter of your thoughts than some random person sitting next to you, right? Like you don't choose your next thought. But anyways, that's getting a little technical. I can dive into that deeper later on, but a lot of life is luck, for better or worse. Now, to be clear, I don't want to like say everyone should just be lazy, or I'm not making a proclamation like discounting people who have worked really hard or saying nobody should work hard because it's just pure luck. No, I'm just saying there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages that we each have that are not really within our control. So it's important to be humble and grateful for what we do have. And if we do have wealth and if we do have power and we have influence, it's important, in my opinion, to use that influence, wealth, and power for the betterment of others, because maybe not everyone got the same opportunities as we did. So moving on to the next section, here are some more kind of like classic American ideas that people often have, that they may not necessarily think deeply about. They might just kind of assume these are true without really reflecting on the reality here. Excuse me. And one of them is that free markets create fair outcomes. This is this like classic idea that's been drilled into American minds over and over through propaganda. And you can look this up. Look up capitalism propaganda, 1950s. Like throughout history, it's happened all the time. If I say the word socialism or communism, and you in your heart are like, oh, I don't want to be a communist. I don't want to, you know, if that brings like anger to you, you have been infected by this propaganda of basically trying to teach you that free markets is the best thing for creating prosperity. Unfortunately, it's actually not the case. Unfortunately, it's a lie. Free markets do not create good outcomes. In fact, the world today is basically under that. This idea of, it's called neo-liberalism. The idea that like you take away all the regulations and you just let the markets be free and that'll create really good outcomes for all. But it doesn't, right? The world today is that. And we have so much pollution, we have growing authoritarianism, we have overfishing, we have biodiversity loss, we have climate change, we have corruption, we have people who are massively rich, billions of dollars, and people who are dirt poor, right? There are numerous problems. I can go on for an hour talking about the problems of the world. The world today is created by neoliberal capitalism, policies largely that advocate for the free market. Now, of course, there are some regulations, and it goes from, in the US, from like Democratic to Republican, and these guys add regulations, these guys strip it away, but more or less, companies are free to do what they want. In fact, the entire basis of the system is that, right? A company can make a product and put it out in the market, and they're free to do that, basically. Now, there are some tests, with safety-related things, maybe with infant toys or food, of course. But how much food gets approved and it turns out to be toxic, right? What did we just repeal? Like those dyes, blue 40, red 20 or whatever? Those have been in foods for decades, and only now they're repealing them? Microplastics everywhere, in our cells, in our bodies, in our brains. But companies have made plastic products forever, right? Like it's been going on for decades. So companies are basically at liberty to do what they want, including things that can cause harm, right? Like dumping their sewage in a lake, and they only face repercussions if they're caught, or if years later we find, oh, we actually tested this product and it turns out it's extremely harmful for us, right? Just the general way the system is set up is not such that it considers the well-being of the planet or people first. It considers the well-being of individuals and corporations first. Profit is everything. And free markets, this idea of free markets with little regulation, is that's somehow going to create a magical, happy, thriving world, is totally false. The reality is that markets perpetuate wealth inequality. And if you have wealth, it's so much easier to make wealth. And yeah, so just, you're going to look up negative externalities. There's a lot of stuff there, but I don't want to dwell too long because I have a lot to actually cover. And I'm taking longer on these than I thought. But another one kind of related to this economic beliefs is if you are poor, if you're in poverty, that's because you've made poor choices. This is not really true. Unfortunately, the way the system is set up, especially in America, I don't know about the rest of the world. I'm sure there are other countries that do it better or worse, but the way it's set up in America, it's actually expensive to be poor. The more money you have in America, the easier it is to save money. Now, I'm not even talking about just like the fact that if you have a lot of money, you can put it in the bank and you get interest on that money. And if you have so much money, you can get so much interest that you don't even have to work. You just basically, more money comes in from the interest of your savings. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about like, for that, everything is structured such that, for example, you can buy in bulk. If you can spend more money and buy in bulk, you'll get a discount. But poor people can't buy everything in bulk because they're poor, right? Eating healthy food, right? If you want to eat healthy, you need to buy organic foods, right? You need to get whole foods and cook them up. You need pots and pans. You need to be able to afford like a kitchen, stove top area, right? But if you're poor, you may not have access to those things, right? So poor people end up having to eat less healthy things, processed food that's a lot cheaper because that's all they can afford, or because they don't have like a home where they can, make healthy foods. So they just end up eating fast food. Then there's like, of course, when you talk about like loans, if a poor person has no money, no collateral, like it's going to be hard for them to get loans. Maybe they can't afford to go to school because they can't, they have no money. So then they can't get a degree so they can't kind of work their way out of this poverty, because it's hard for them to get, education, good education. So I'm actually really grateful that a lot of states have programs to help people get off, off the streets and into educational programs, into vocational programs, give them training. Those are so important. But just in general, the idea that being poor means you made poor choices, I think obscures the difficult reality that we live in the United States. Similar to some of the previous ones, this is kind of like a new section I moved on to. This idea that America is a true meritocracy. The idea that it is your talent and effort that determine your social position. The reality is that US social mobility is actually lower than many developed countries. Bigger predictors for your life outcome are your zip code, your parents' education, the color of your skin. A lot of those factors I talked about before in the earlier section, those have more merit. Those have more of an impact on your ultimate life outcome than, so this idea of like America as a true meritocracy, if you work hard, you will succeed. Not necessarily. If that was true, then we would expect to see people of all zip codes and skin colors kind of like equally succeed more or less, right? There would be kind of a random distribution, but it's not really the case. You tend to see certain people, people with more money or from wealthier areas with more connections, they tend to succeed more often. So it's not, America isn't a true meritocracy. It's kind of related to this other ones on the list. Everybody has equal opportunities. I guess it's kind of like another way of looking at that through a different lens. Yes, everyone has equal opportunities in some sense, but depending on where you're born or like, how you were raised or who your parents are, you may never realize you have certain opportunities. Think about a child who grew up in a home where they got tutoring and test prep all the time, and they had like a nanny come in and help mommy, versus a child whose parents have to work and juggle multiple jobs and just don't really have enough. They can barely keep food on the table. Which child do you think is going to get into a better college, right? Like get a better job? Technically, they might have equal opportunity in some like abstract sense, but in practice, not really. Related to that, and I've actually already mentioned this, so I'll just quickly go over this one, is this idea that discrimination is mostly in the past. I actually thought this too. I remember going through high school and, I was reading about American history and, the Civil War and slavery and I was reading, like Martin Luther King, like, that happened 60 years ago. That stuff's in the past, right? We're all cool now, right? And that was until I was walking and I went into a restaurant and somebody called me the N-word. First of all, I was like, what? That doesn't make sense. I'm confused by that. But the thing is, my adoptive parents are like super, super white, right? Like I'm not super, super white. Okay. So they just probably saw that we were like different. And they were like, oh, like you adopted this darker skinned boy. And yeah, I was just surprised. And that was weird. I'm glad his wife was like, don't say that. It was really like, she was mad at him. But yeah, no, there's absolutely discrimination today. You know, I have African American friends, and you know, I'll still hear stories and even see things where like they just have a harder time. There's definitely racial profiling in terms of getting a job. It's harder. Unfortunately, there's like subtle discrimination and overt discrimination depending on where you are in the country. But even in places that are like, oh, this is you know, we're democratic, we're not racist, right? There's still like kind of subtle discrimination that goes on. So yeah, and it's not even just racial discrimination too, as I just remember looking at the bullet points here. It's also gender discrimination as well. And that was also one that I was like, oh, that's mostly in the past, right? Like women's rights, they got the right to vote. You know, I was reading about that in history, and I'm like, oh, like it's more or less equal. Everybody around me in my high school, like these girls seem like they're, you know, happy. I don't think they get like worse grades or anything. But it wasn't until I really had conversations with some women and saw different instances going through life where there was discrimination, where I realized, okay, there actually is still discrimination. For example, in pay. One of my partners was, actually several of my partners in the past have been part of like lawsuits at their tech companies where they were like this class action lawsuit where the women had to say, you know, we're underpaid, we're super underpaid compared to the guys, and they all won. That's still the reality, unfortunately. So discrimination is not mostly past. I think there is a lot of discrimination that we really need to be mindful of, and it comes down to gender, you know, skin color, and a lot of areas. Wealth, of course. Okay, so I have a lot more to go, but you know, I'm gonna keep going. I feel like I'm on a roll here. Normally these are kind of aimed at to be an hour. Oh, hey, Dharmadam, what's up? I'm doing really well, thank you. I was just going through this list of assumptions that Americans often have that they may perhaps not have thought a lot about, and I wanted to share my perspective on them. Cool, cool, cool. So I'll just continue. So one of the other assumptions that's huge here in America that everybody believes, it's like so many people, it's ingrained into society, is the idea that the nuclear family is natural. What do I mean by that? Like the two-parent household with their biological children is like the default model. Thanks for the follow, bro. Wait, I saw the alert, but why aren't you showing up on my thingy bobbers? Oh, I'm confused by that. I'm gonna have to fix that at some point. But I think when people follow me, they're supposed to go on these like stream label things. Streamlabs, you're killing me. I'll have to debug that later, bro. But thanks for the follow. Yeah, the nuclear family is actually not at all the sort of natural way. Human beings prior to civilization, TED Dogmas of Science. I'm gonna Google that. Yo, Buzzriff, what's up? Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll totally check it out. Cool, cool, man. Thanks a lot. So yeah, let me continue on this idea of the nuclear family. You know, I grew up in this like situation where my parents, you know, they both went to Harvard. They were like, Nathan, this is the path to success in life. You gotta get really good grades in high school, go to Harvard, get a degree, get a really good job, get paid a lot of money, and buy a home and settle down with your wife and create a family and have this little, live happily ever after. No, that didn't, first of all, it didn't really materialize when I actually tried to go buy a house. Even as an engineer at a really, nice job making 6 figures, Bay Area salary, totally, man. My socials are on my website, njb.fyi. All right, I will, except I'm scared that you're a scammer and you're going to scam me. A lot of people have been trying to do that to me. I'm like, no, bro, you can't. I'm immune to that. I'm not going to send you Bitcoin. But yeah. Dang, man. Dharma Dom, he's doubting you, bro. He's doubting you. We'll see. Let me continue. So, yeah, nuclear family, it's not natural. Actually, back in the day before human civilization, we're talking like 12,000 years ago, but when we were still kind of nomadic peoples living in tribes. I feel you, bro. I feel you. Do what you got to do. We lived in small communities, right? We had villages that we had to raise family. We had grandma nearby, uncles, everybody. It was a big, giant family. We all supported each other. And then we had civilization, and a lot changed, and it kind of all got screwed up and messed up. And now somehow we've ended up in this like situation where everybody thinks they have to send grandma when she gets old to her own, elder care facility, and we'll just have our little nuclear family, single family household, and kind of isolate ourselves from everyone else. That's not healthy. It's not the way to be. Community is the way to be. I really strongly invite everybody to look into this idea called intentional community. I'm building one myself. I'm going to get a bunch of cool people who vibe with me, who have the same values. We're going to pour all our money together and buy like a super big estate and just make this awesome place where we all support each other and can live according to our values. But yeah, that's a big one. Nuclear family is not natural. And kind of similar to that is this idea that the American way of life is universally desirable. In fact, well, a commune is something, and it might be a community, but it's not really the same thing. There are kind of different words for kind of similar related idea. Like, for example, one is an eco-village. And often eco-villages are kind of like experiments where people are kind of exploring what it's like to live in nature and grow your own food. But the broadest term, I think, is just an intentional community. It's where people make a community intentionally, as opposed to just a community where it's like, you live in a community. You live in Brooklyn, that's a community, but it's kind of like an accidental community. The people that make it up they didn't like coordinate and like, I'm gonna live here, you can live there. Oh yeah, I don't know much about that. Is that the guy who I'm thinking of? Yeah, okay, I don't know much about that guy. But yeah, you have to be careful. There are definitely people who start communities and they go super south. I think there's one, Jonestown, whatever it was, where they all drank like this like poison-laced liquid and they all died. They had crazy, fantastical beliefs. Yeah, that's absolutely not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a bunch of people who are chill. We want to vibe. Me and Buzzriff. He's going to be part of my community in the future, right? And they just want to make something awesome. It's not about like any weird religious beliefs or anything like that. It's not about like having one like figure that everyone bows down to. It's just about like saving resources, about eating healthy, growing your own food, things like that. I'll actually definitely talk about that more because that's a big part of what I've been doing the past few years is living in intentional community and designing one. But yeah, so on that last thing, this idea that the American way of life is desirable, actually very much not so. I've come to believe that actually the American way of life, in a lot of ways, it can be very toxic. In particular, like the way we consume so much stuff. I, for example, when I go to the grocery store, I do my best to like just buy like whole fruits and vegetables, but so much stuff comes up in single-use plastics. And so I end up throwing so much trash away. And I feel so bad about that because, the last couple of years I spent in Hawaii, and there's beaches on the east side of the Big Island, and actually probably a lot of the islands, where there's just constant trash coming in all the time. Like I picked up trash bags, huge, like 100-gallon trash bags of trash in like 2 days. And then like a week later, it was all littering the beach again. You just can't, there's like a great Pacific garbage patch of trash in the middle of the ocean that's like shedding its trash on Hawaii. And it was just a very like, it was very real for me to experience that trash just hitting random slippers and, other plastic things. But yeah, so I don't know, there's just a lot to it. I love my country. I love America. I think we get some things wrong. And one of those things actually is the city. Oh, I'm totally into meditation, dude. I do a meditation session every single day on this channel. Check out my schedule. I do mindfulness meditation, Vipassana. What about you? What kind of meditation do you do? Word, man. Join me for a session. Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the particular flavors or variants and how they differ, but totally down to just, come to a meditation session once. Lead the meditation if you can. Hell, I'll be there. 3 marks. Never heard of that, but I'm going to write it down to Google later. Cool. Well, the session right now is I have basically 15 minutes of people just coming on and, if they want to ask about meditation or talk about it for the first 15 minutes, we can do it. And then I do an hour of self-guided meditation where I invite people to guide themselves. I do my own guided meditation and I use an app and I encourage people to use an app, but I'm not currently at the point where I feel super comfortable guiding the meditation myself, but maybe after my first 100 hours or 300 hours, I'll consider that. But for now, so then there's that 1 hour period, and then there's another 15-minute period at the end where people can talk about their meditation. So usually I do a lot of focus on the breath, classic technique. Apparently the Buddha said that you can just do, anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath, all the way to enlightenment. So that's like a core technique for me. But then I also do body scans, and then I do, so that's like kind of internal awareness, and then I do external awareness, where I kind of have like a soft perspective, just kind of like absorbing all the sounds and the sights if I open my eyes, and the sensations all around me without getting fixated on any one thing. Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, just kind of mix it up. So yeah, also, so you like a super advanced live streamer? Are you doing this a lot? Because first of all, this is my second video, or second live stream. So, I'm not super familiar with how it all works. I haven't watched a lot of live streams, and I watched some gaming live stream. Okay, yeah. Oh, I just like when someone's doing a live stream, oh yeah, man, I'll do Buzzriff, bro. I'll do that after. I think there's a 50% chance you're a scammer, and I'm scared. Just kidding. Not really scared, but like, tell me you're for real, bro. Wait, but robots are that advanced? They have robots that can come in and like have a conversation with you? Are they like AI based robots? Buzzriff. Okay. If you prove you're a human, say okay, tell me what 5 plus 4 plus 1 is. If you can type that in chat, I'll believe you're human. 5 plus 4 plus 1. It's easy. You can do it in your head. Yeah, I've been having designers. Like what? They're going to design me a website or something? Yeah, I had some guy like, that's interesting. Yeah, I get a lot of that stuff on Discord. It's kind of interesting. I mean, sometimes I just go through with it because I've actually had conversation with them, and they're like some random person from like Nigeria or something, and I'm just like, bro, like, why are you trying to scam me? Like, what's going on? Like, talk to me about your problems. And you know, I've made some friends this way. Like this guy was like, oh, my mom's like, she's really sick. Like, okay, don't bullshit me, bro. Like, give me the real truth. The only way this is gonna work is if you're completely honest with me. And some guys have opened up. You know, the friendship didn't last. We're not still friends now, but there's some touching moments for sure. But yeah, Buzzer, if you didn't answer me, I think Dharmadam's he's right. You're a bot. Yeah, so one thing I'm still figuring out, and I was going to ask you, Dharmadam, is like what. So I have these like live streams, right? I'm doing meditation. I'm doing these sessions. These are like I call them perspective sessions, where I bring up a topic and offer my perspective, and then I kind of open it up for people to chat. I guess I just don't really understand like what a good flow is. Like if I start doing a meditation and a bunch of people are asking me questions, like, do I just delay the meditation and like keep answering their questions? Like, if I have something scheduled to do, is it better that I engage with people on my stream, or is it better that I stick with my scheduled program? That's kind of this thing. I have no idea how to balance that. That's kind of like my first inclination. That's why I'm like engaging with you. Yeah, I don't want to be like a video playing and then the people are just like, who is this guy? He's not even listening to me. Thanks. I appreciate your input. And also, like, I just have no idea how to build my channel, right? Like, I have like videos. I started yesterday. So I'm doing videos like every day for a couple hours, but I don't know, like, do I like go on Twitter and like, I'm posting, like, I don't have any followers. Like, what's the best way to kind of like build up a viewer base, you know? Like, do I go to like meditation forums online and be like, I'm starting live stream? Like, no one likes when you do that. Throw it at me. Yeah, I went hardcore, like, well, I don't know if this is hardcore, but, you know, I kind of went all on, rather than picking one particular platform, I did Streamlabs. So I'm currently streaming to like 4 different platforms right now in the hopes that like will kind of expose me more and more. Yeah, consistency. I've been reading about that a lot. Like just being consistent is huge, and I think I can do that. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. So that means I actually have to like view other streams. That's kind of where I'm like, I'm not doing that currently. I spent the last like 6 months like setting up everything, all the accounts, and putting everything in place. Of course, it doesn't even work because you subbed and your name's not up there. But yeah, I didn't actually take time to like sit down and watch the live streams of other people, and I really should. As you're saying, it's finding other streamers who have similar vibes, similar content, and yeah, like we can rate each other and just collaborate. Yeah, for sure. I'm not a rusher. I'm a dragger. Just kidding. Um, okay. Oh, that's a good idea. I really need to figure out how to do that from Streamlabs. I'm going to write this note down, though, in particular, so I don't forget it. Appreciate your help here. At the end, raid someone after each stream. Well, yeah, it's going to be a little like, I'll be rating them with like one person, but hopefully they appreciate that with that really special person I'm bringing. Yeah, I need to figure that out because I'm currently doing everything through Streamlabs desktop, but it's not really like fully integrated. It's like I have to figure out how to do the platform specific actions. And that might just mean opening up Twitch and doing it from there. Yeah, sure. How do you do that? I have to open up Twitch. Shit, I hope you're not a scammer, bro. Sending me to a virus website, steal my credit cards. Okay, I'm enter mindfulness. Wow, I'm the only mindfulness live streamer, or I guess someone with that in the title. Maybe tags. Okay, there are people with videos tagged mindfulness. That's a good starting list. Non-duality. I hope to get there someday. That's my stretch goal. Cool. I bookmarked it. Appreciate it, man. So are you American, bro? Wasting time, you mean downloading all this wisdom? Australian, that's dope. How are you guys doing over there? Is it as crazy as the US feels right now? I see. Interesting. Yeah. That's what I like. I like more chill. That sounds nice. I get the sense that most Americans don't know how to be chill, except in Hawaii. But that's kind of another can of worms because we totally stole that place. I was there in the past 2 years exploring an intentional community there, and I learned a lot about how Hawaii came to be a state, and it's actually pretty tragic. But that aside, they're chill. Sure, man. Thanks for your tips and thanks for coming by. Oh, what book are you reading? May I know? It's okay if it's secret. I heard of it. It may even be in my library. That's cool. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you more sometime about all these topics. I'm super into mindfulness and meditation, and I don't really meet a lot of people who are as well, so it's cool to have somebody I can talk to about it. Cool. Yeah. See you later, man. So that was a little bit of a break. I appreciate making a friend. So I originally had this list I was going through. I'm almost done. I'm just going to wrap up this list a bit quicker than I was going before because it's getting late-ish. I mean, not really. Most people, I guess, watch streams for hours on end, but I tend to want to keep the discussion to like the first 30 minutes, maybe 45, and then have another like 30 minutes of discussion or whatever, but I'm way over time. It's cool though. Let's talk about some more things. Assumptions many Americans hold without realizing it. Excuse me. there's a lot related to work and time. And I was this way for a long time. Remember, I mentioned how I grew up in this sort of cultural environment that said your value is what you can produce, basically. Your value is in your productivity. This is kind of a common thing that people still believe. Human value is related to your economic output. And I just don't vibe with it today. It suggests that people who can't work for one reason or another, like they have a disability or they're just old, or they're taking care of somebody else, it suggests that they have less worth. And I think it gets people into this mindset where they get really obsessed and they work like long, insane hours. They barely get enough sleep. It makes people feel guilty if they take a break, like have some rest or just do something that's like joyful and fun, but maybe not productive. I don't really like this mindset. I don't think it's healthy for us. And it's related to this other idea that like being busy is the same as being important. If you have a packed schedule, you're successful, you're valuable. I don't know, I think this kind of like just privileges visible work and devalues reflection, planning, maintenance work, There's a lot to unpack there. I'll just leave it at that because I'm going to go quicker here. But the last thing on this like subject of work and time is this idea that like retirement at 65 is normal, achievable. I think it is if you are in the right place at the right time. A lot of boomers got pretty lucky with, the way things played out for them, where, they saw a relatively inexpensive home that they were able to afford, which rose dramatically in value, and pensions and savings account, investments going up. But not everyone had the same opportunities as that, that just relates to all the discrimination we already talked about before. So I won't really get too into it again, but the idea that we want to, just the very idea that we want to work our butts off until we hit 65 or 70 and then finally retire, I think is a kind of a disease of human civilization. Maybe that's putting it a bit harshly, but I don't know if that's healthy. I don't know if that's the way we should be. I think with proper automation and if we structure our societies in a better way, we can probably get away with most people barely working at all, and just being free to do what they want. Maybe you don't want to work and slave away at your job all day, and you want to make some music, beautiful artworks, or whatever. But our current economic structure doesn't allow for that. It forces people to get a job to survive, just to pay the bills, keep a roof over their head, and it fills all of our time, so we come home exhausted and we barely have time to do the things we actually like to do, the things we're actually passionate about, let alone other important things like raising our children, right? Like we don't even raise our children ourselves for the most part now. We send them off to school and then they go to daycare or after school programs, or we have a nanny. And then, we come home from work and there's a little sliver of time and in between, them doing homework and, then they go to bed. Most of the time, we're not even really around as parents, I think, in the traditional setup. And I don't think that's good. I think parents should be parents. It's really what I think, but who am I to say? I don't have kids yet, but maybe someday. Another common idea that I think is luckily like finally fading, but for a long time, especially when I was going through high school, there was idea that thinness equals health. If you're thin, you're healthy. In fact, it was really toxic when I was going through high school. There was a lot of like pro-Ana websites, and everybody was trying to be deathly skinny. What was the saying I heard? Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Wow, that's like terrible. And that led to like a lot of issues that people had with their image. And I think we've actually improved a lot on that over the last couple decades. Thankfully, there's more acceptance of different body types. I don't think we're perfectly there yet, but yeah, it's definitely a slightly different world today. But that's just like kind of a classic one that some people may still kind of have in their mind. Similar to that is, I don't know, I think there's like this shame to admit that one might have like mental health issues in the United States. A lot of people like they kind of like I don't need therapy. Like they don't want to go because they like don't want to be seen as somebody who has issues or something. I think the reality is though that probably like 90% of people would really, really benefit from therapy. Like, excuse me, like a huge amount of Americans would probably benefit from some sort of therapy practice. And so many of us have these, like I was saying before, like shadows and traumas and other aspects of ourselves that, deserve some reflection and some, maybe some expert opinion on, how we might, recognize these behaviors, these parts of who we are, and, improve them, grow beyond them, heal them. Another one in America in particular is that medical care is a commodity, not a right. This one is very interesting. It's kind of like assumed that, healthcare privatized, that's a good thing. But I don't actually think so. I think what that does is it creates a system that's really unfair where the people who have the most money get the best treatment, and the people who have not enough money get very poor treatment. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair. I think everybody deserves to have good treatment and have a good doctor who actually cares about them. But the reality is, if you're poor, if you're on Medicaid and you get a doctor's appointment, you get a dentist appointment, they're going to shuffle you in there and out of there in like 10, 15 minutes, right? Like you don't really get individual attention. And that's luckily if you even get a doctor that's like, a trained professional doctor that cares about you and is going to be with you for an extended period of time. Often you're assigned to like a teaching school and you get some grad student for one visit and then you get another person for another visit. And you just have like haphazard care. Medical care, I think, is a right. Everybody should have a right to good medical care, regardless of how much money you make. And I think if we did that, the world would be a better place. Moving on to the next section. 2 more. Don't worry, I'm almost done. romantic love should be effortless. I actually kind of thought some element of this myself for a long time. I had this idea that, like, you know, I'm gonna date a lot. I'm gonna try dating a bunch of different people, and when I find the one, I'll just know. I'll just know, and it'll just work out, and it'll be so smooth. It'll be so easy. That's a nice little Disney, dream there. In reality, relationships take work. They take ongoing effort and work. And like I said before, we're always changing. So you can meet a person and have a good relationship at the beginning, and then 5 years later be like, oh, this isn't working out for me. Because you're different people, interests may have changed. So this, just generally this idea that romantic love should be effortless, I think is one that we can finally kind of like put aside and just recognize that this idea of true love is not really real, right? It's not like one person, Cloud Atlas, that movie where like this one person meets in every single universe or something. That's kind of a nice little story, but in reality there are millions of people out there who we could be in a relationship with that would work. In all the cases, pretty much it's going to take some amount of effort. Of course, some people you match with, it's going to take more effort than others, but yeah. Okay, so last section. It's just kind of like raising awareness about, thank you. I invite you to think about various habits and patterns that you picked up from, different parts of your life, friends and family and peers, that you assume are normal. But I think if you really reflect upon them, you might be like, oh wait, that's not actually normal at all. This has been super apparent to me over the past few years because I've been staying in a bunch of different places. And so I get to see how other people do things, right? Like, so most of us, we grow up in our family's home, right? And we're used to the way they do things, like meals, right? So I thought as a kid growing up in my adoptive family's home that, everybody has a little side of potatoes, on their plate, about a quarter of their plate, and they have like another like half to a quarter of veggies and like a quarter of meat, and like, some salad, and everybody has like forks, and my parents had this whole spread, they taught me this like classic Victorian setup where you have like, the one fork for your meal, the one fork for your salad, you have a spoon, you have a soup spoon, you have like different knives, the whole setup. But then I ate at other people's houses. I'm like, wow, everybody does this differently. What I thought was normal was actually not normal at all. So it's easy if you're kind of exposed to like direct experience of seeing other people do other things in other situations. But some of them you probably can just kind of reflect upon and be like, well, I've kind of assumed this was the way people do things, but maybe it's not. And it applies to all random things. Like, think about how long you take a shower. I take insanely short showers. I take probably a 3 to 4 minute shower or less. And sometimes I take longer, do a little extra clean, a little extra scrub here and there, wash my hair and such. But I'm very like conscious of my water use. I try not to use a lot of water because I think if I do use a lot of water and everybody else was like me, then we would just run out of water quicker, and that would be a bad thing. A lot of places are like really water starved. California, a lot of these places are drying up. Not to mention, the global south and all around the world. So I take really short showers. And it astonished me when I saw other people take like hour-long showers. I'm like, wow, like that's interesting. It's a lot of water. So yeah, just little things like that, like how much salt you use, right? I've seen people when I was living in an intentional community. I saw a bunch of people come together. We'd sit together at this giant table, and everybody puts, they grab a piece of bread and puts butter on it. And some people take like a chunk of butter that's like a quarter of the stick, and you're like, wow. So it's just an invitation to just think about little things like that you do. And is that normal? Is that healthy? Is this aligned with my values? Just goes back to the original topic of kind of like understanding ourselves and our identities, and what is truly important to us and what is maybe not so important, what is authentic to ourselves, and maybe what is more like, maybe what your parents pushed on you or your peers pushed on you. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it all up. Little longer than I had anticipated, but I hope people enjoyed it, and anybody who watches in the future, who's coming back into the past, I hope you can get something from this. But I'm going to wrap it up for now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.